I never imagined that day would mark my end, and truthfully, I hadn't envisioned how it might come at all. I had dedicated my life to the church, serving God's work through prayer and the sacraments, yet I never expected death to strike with such sudden, fierce force. The morning had begun like any other. I awoke before dawn as usual, kneeling by my bedside to offer my early prayers. For a while, my heart had felt weighed down by the state of the world, the unrest, the divisions, and even the mounting tensions within the church itself. I had spent countless hours praying for Pope Francis, asking for the wisdom to guide him, the strength to lead the faithful, and clarity in these troubled times. Still, an inexplicable disquiet gnawed at me, as if I sensed an approaching storm that I couldn't quite name. I followed my regular routine that morning, preparing for Mass, reviewing the readings, and stepping into the sanctuary I had known for so many years. The instant my feet touched the cool marble floor, a subtle unease washed over me. It wasn't dramatic, just a faint discomfort, a touch of dizziness, as though my heart was skipping a beat. I brushed it aside, convinced that my robust health and the day's duties would carry me through. Mass proceeded in its usual beauty. The congregation gathered. Prayers ascended like whispered pleas to heaven. The Eucharist was received, and for a fleeting moment, everything felt sacred, untouched by the chaos outside. Yet as the service ended and I distanced myself from the altar, the feeling returned. A sharp, squeezing pain in my chest, like a fist clenching around my heart. I halted, grasping the edge of a pew to steady myself. The pain did not relent. It intensified, spreading across my chest and shooting down my left arm. My breathing became shallow, and the room began to tilt, its edges blurring as if reality itself were faltering. My vision wavered and my legs buckled, and in an instant, the strength I'd always relied on vanished. I remember the moment my knees hit the floor. I heard someone calling my name, but their voice was distant and muffled as though I were already drifting away. Before darkness claimed me, the last image I saw was the crucifix suspended above the altar, Christ's figure gazing down with a blend of sorrow and love. Then, everything went dark. Yet I did not simply vanish. I became aware again, though I realized I was no longer contained within my physical body. At first, it was a peculiar sensation, a state of weightlessness, a feeling of floating free from the constraints of flesh and bone. I perceived my surroundings, not through my eyes, but in a way that transcended ordinary sense. Sounds resonated without coming through my ears. This experience was beyond the physical. It was something deeper, something truer. Glancing down, I saw my lifeless body lying on the church floor, surrounded by onlookers. Some shouted my name while others knelt in fervent prayer. Within moments, the scene shifted. Paramedics rushed in, their movements urgent, and their voices clipped with focus. One pressed his fingers to my neck and then shook his head, while another readied a defibrillator, preparing to shock my heart back into rhythm. I should have felt terror, watching my own unmoving body being fought for, yet instead I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Not the peace of quiet prayer or solitude, but something far more profound. It was as if all the burdens of my earthly worries, my concerns and struggles, had been lifted away, leaving behind only clarity and understanding. Then I sensed another force, a gentle pull that swiftly grew stronger, as if an unseen power was drawing me upward. The church, the paramedics, even my body, all receded into the distance, their sounds fading to a mere whisper as I ascended beyond all that was familiar. The ceiling, which should have halted my ascent, was no barrier. I passed through it effortlessly, as if the very laws of the physical world no longer applied. And then I encountered a light unlike any I'd ever seen. It wasn't sunlight, fire, or even the warm glow of a chapel's candle. It was a living light, pulsing and breathing with an energy that radiated love, warmth, and truth. This light wasn't simply illuminating, it beckoned me forward. As I moved closer, the sensation of weightlessness deepened, and suddenly I realized I was no longer rising within the confines of an earthly space. I had entered a realm beyond time and pain, a place so profound that the very air felt charged with a presence so intense that I dropped to my knees in awe. I sensed God. I did not see him directly, yet his presence was everywhere, woven into every fiber of this place. Every part of my soul recognized it. I had spent my life praying, searching, and yearning for his nearness, and now here I was. Even in that serene moment, amidst the overwhelming love, I detected something unexpected, an urgency. I was here for a reason. Something significant was about to unfold. I opened my mouth to speak, though I didn't know what I was meant to say. Before I could utter a word, I became aware of another presence. A figure emerged from the light, a figure I recognized even before his face came into focus. No introduction was needed. My soul knew him instantly. Jesus. He stood before me, clothed in a brilliant radiance that surpassed anything I had ever experienced. His light was not merely a glow. It carried weight, authority, and a holiness that was alive and dynamic, enveloping me like the presence I had longed for all my life. His eyes were unlike any I had seen, deep, expressive pools holding love, sorrow, wisdom, and power. They didn't just look at me. They truly saw me. Every thought, every feeling, every moment of my life was laid bare. Overcome, I sank to my knees. He regarded me not with judgment or disappointment, but with a love so deep it brought tears to my eyes. Then he spoke with a voice that was more than mere sound. It was the embodiment of truth, resonating within me and shaking me to my core. It was gentle yet commanding, tender yet powerful. It is not yet your time. Those words carried a reality that was impossible to ignore. I blinked, trying to grasp their meaning. Not my time. Yet I had died. I had left my body. I had witnessed it all. Before I could question further, he continued, I must show you something. And with that, the light around me shifted. A new vision unfolded. A revelation I was never meant to witness, something the world was not yet ready for. In that moment I understood why I had been brought here. A force far stronger than anything I had ever known pulled me upward, not simply lifting me through the air, but carrying me through layers of existence, through realms unseen, yet undeniably real. The world I had known, the church, my body lying cold on the floor, dissolved into the distance like a fading dream. Before me stretched an endless tunnel of light, pulsing with an energy unlike anything I had experienced. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It was a living, enveloping glow that wrapped me in warmth, peace, and an urgent call. This journey was no ordinary passage. The atmosphere was charged, as if time itself had lost its meaning. I wasn't traveling through space as we know it. I was moving through something far greater. As I advanced, I sensed a change in my surroundings. The tunnel widened, expanding into an infinite expanse beyond human comprehension. The peace here was otherworldly, devoid of fear, pain, or doubt. Every burden I had ever borne, every worry that had troubled my heart, simply vanished, as if I had stepped into the very presence of holiness. And then I realized I was not alone. From the radiance emerged a figure whose presence immediately brought me to my knees. I didn't need to ask who he was. My soul recognized Jesus the moment I saw him. My entire being trembled. His light was not just around him, it was part of him. flowing like a living presence filled with power, authority, and an unfathomable love. His face, radiant beyond description, carried both a deep sorrow and boundless compassion. When his eyes met mine, I felt known in a way I had never experienced. He saw everything, every secret thought, every whispered prayer, every struggle, failure, and moment of doubt. There was no hiding, no pretense, nothing left unsaid. He understood me completely, yet there was not a trace of condemnation in his gaze, only pure, overwhelming love. A love so intense that it nearly crushed me. Tears welled up as I bowed my head, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his presence. I could barely breathe under the weight of it all. The very air hummed with an indescribable essence of holiness, truth, and eternity. I longed to speak, to confess my unworthiness, to admit how small I felt before such divine glory. Before I could utter a word, he stepped closer. With a voice that transcended ordinary sound, a voice that was truth incarnate, he said, "There is something you must see." His words carried a gravity that transformed the space around us. I could not predict what would follow, but I felt a deep, aching urgency that something monumental was about to be revealed. The world unfurled before me like an open book. I soon realized I was not standing on solid ground, but suspended in a realm beyond space, gazing upon the earth from a perspective no human could ever imagine. It was as if my soul had been granted a vision beyond the veil, beyond time and the illusions of mortal life. Before me lay a vast expanse, and within it I saw churches scattered like stars across the night sky. Some shone tall and radiant with an indescribable light. Their walls pulsed with warmth, and their sanctuaries echoed with prayers that ascended like golden incense toward the heavens. These churches were vibrant, not only physically, but spiritually alive. They were havens where God's presence truly dwelled, where humble hearts sought and found solace. Yet, not every church glowed with that divine radiance. Shifting my gaze, I saw with a trembling soul that some churches, once filled with luminous divinity, now flickered weakly, their light barely clinging to life under an unnameable weight, while others had gone completely dark. Their grand walls seemed hollow, and their ornately adorned altars were empty of genuine worship, a truth I felt deep within. I had dedicated my life to serving God, tending to his flock and leading others in prayer, always believing that the church was an unshakable beacon of truth. But in this transcendent space, I saw what my human eyes had never fully grasped. Many had strayed from him, even within his own house. I turned to Jesus, and when our eyes met, I saw in his gaze the grief of a shepherd mourning his lost sheep. Then he spoke, "My church has forgotten me." His words resonated deeply, sinking into the very core of my being. They honored me with their utterance, yet revealed that the hearts offering them were far removed from true devotion. I could hardly breathe under the weight of that sorrow, a sorrow not mine, but his, the pain of a God who had given everything for his people, only to see so many distracted, deceived, or indifferent. As my vision shifted back, I saw faces among the dimming and darkened churches, countless souls whose eyes were hollow as they sat in pews, their prayers reduced to mere motions, and whose hearts were absent. Others stood behind pulpits, delivering sermons that sounded correct, yet lacked the true power, conviction, or anointing of genuine relationship. They spoke of tradition and duty, but not of a living, personal connection with God. Then I noticed something else, the world beyond these churches. Outside, people wandered, lost and searching. Some had once been inside, but had walked away disillusioned, while others had never entered at all, convinced there was nothing there for them. I saw the slow unraveling of faith, not in every soul, but in enough to alter the very fabric of the world. In that moment, I understood that this was not merely about a few stray churches losing their way. A figure emerged once more from the radiant glow, stepping forward with such commanding presence that I fell to my knees. I did not need to ask who he was. My soul knew instantly it was Jesus. My entire being trembled as his light, an intrinsic part of him, flowed around and through him like a living force filled with power, authority, and an unfathomable love. His face, radiant and indescribable, bore the expressions of deep sorrow and limitless compassion. When his eyes locked onto mine, I felt more understood than I ever had before. He perceived every aspect of my existence, every silent thought, every whispered prayer, every struggle and failure. There was no hiding. Nothing was left unexamined. And yet, his gaze held no judgment, only an overwhelming love. A love so deep that it nearly broke me. Tears streamed down as I bowed my head, overpowered by the weight of his presence. I could scarcely breathe in the immense holiness that surrounded us, an essence of truth and eternity itself. I longed to speak of my unworthiness, to confess how small I felt before such divine glory. But before I could, he stepped closer, and with a voice that was pure truth, he said, "There is something you must see." His words, spoken not as commands but as an undeniable reality, shifted the space around us. I felt a profound urgency, a deep, aching call that something beyond my imagination was about to be revealed. The world unfolded before me like an open book. I found myself not on solid ground, but suspended in a realm beyond space, gazing upon the earth from a perspective no human could ever see. It was as if my soul had been granted sight beyond the veil, beyond time and the deceptive illusions of mortal life. Before me lay a vast expanse, within which I saw countless churches scattered like stars in a boundless night sky. Some shone with an intense, radiant glow, their walls pulsing with life and their sanctuaries alive with the sound of prayers rising like golden incense. Yet, many did not share this radiance. I saw churches whose divine light flickered feebly, dimmed under an unnamed burden, and others that had gone entirely dark. In that moment, I saw not only the splendor of true worship, but also the stark reality of its absence. The images of these dimming and darkened sanctuaries, where hearts had grown distant and worship had become hollow, filled me with sorrow. It was clear that while some continued to bask in the glow of divine love, many had lost their way, an unraveling of faith that reached far beyond a few churches. It was a crisis that could reshape the world. And so, in that transcendent space, I witnessed the profound contrast between the living, vibrant presence of God in some sanctuaries and the barren, disconnected rituals in others. This vision left me with an understanding that, even in the midst of overwhelming divine love, there lay a call to rediscover true, heartfelt worship, a call to return to the genuine relationship with God that I had spent my life seeking. This was a spiritual upheaval, a transformation unfolding right before our eyes, unseen by most, yet with devastating consequences. I returned to Jesus with a shattered heart. "Why?" I murmured. "How did it come to this?" His face blended sorrow with love. It was because they allowed the world to define me instead of seeking me for themselves. They raised grand temples, yet ignored the condition of their hearts. They spoke my name while forgetting the sound of my call. I surveyed the flickering churches and the souls within. Many remained faithful. Indeed, many still sought him with genuine intent, but far too many were asleep, too distracted, too comfortable in hollow rituals, blind to how far they had strayed. Then Jesus stretched out his hand, and I witnessed something else that sent tremors through my entire being. I saw leaders, priests, bishops, even those holding the highest offices in the church. Some were true shepherds, still fighting for their flock and standing firm in their faith. Yet others, I could see their faces clearly. Something essential was missing. Some wore robes of authority but had no light in their eyes. Others spoke lofty words while their hearts were entangled in politics, power, and compromise. Some had begun in truth but grew weary, slowly bending under the weight of a world that no longer craved God's truth. And far off, at the very pinnacle, I saw a mighty figure cloaked in both light and shadow. I couldn't discern his face, yet my soul recognized him immediately. I gasped. The Pope. Jesus' expression remained unchanged, but I sensed an overwhelming, profound sorrow and also hope in his presence. I longed to ask, what does this mean? Is this a warning? A prophecy? But before I could speak, Jesus declared with firm resolve, "Pray for him. Pray for my church." In that moment I understood. The church stood at a crossroads. A hidden, yet palpable battle was raging over its future, its outcome still uncertain. My soul trembled as I realized why I had been brought here. This was more than a vision. It was a summons to act, to pray, to awaken, to return to him before it was too late. The flickering churches, the lost souls, the weary leaders. There was still time, but that time was running short. I turned to Jesus, my voice trembling. What must I do? His eyes, filled with love and urgency, met mine. There is more I must reveal to you. With those words, the vision shifted once again. Suddenly I found myself in a place I recognized immediately, the Vatican. The towering beauty of St. Peter's Basilica rose before me, its intricate details softly glowing under an overcast sky. Yet something felt different. An eerie stillness hung in the air, a silence laden with meaning, as if the very walls were holding their breath. I stepped forward, uncertain why I was here, and then I saw him. Pope Francis sat alone, his head bowed in deep prayer. His pristine white robes seemed to weigh on his frail frame, as though he bore a burden too immense for any one man. His hands trembled gently on his lap, his breathing slow and measured. I sensed in him a weariness and sorrow far beyond physical fatigue. For a moment I simply watched. The world knew him as the leader of the Catholic Church, a shepherd revered by millions. Yet, in that quiet moment, he was just a man, carrying a weight beyond himself. I looked to Jesus, standing beside me in radiant light, his face unreadable. "What is happening to him?" I whispered. Jesus' gaze stayed fixed on the Pope as he replied, "The burden of the Church is immense," his voice calm, yet laced with sorrow. My chest tightened. "Is he suffering?" Jesus turned to me, his eyes brimming with both love and sadness. "Many of my shepherds are struggling. Some lead with integrity, while others have been misled by the world." I swallowed hard. The urgency in his words was impossible to ignore. I glanced back at Pope Francis, whose lips moved in silent prayer. Though I couldn't hear his words, I felt the depth of his plea. A profound cry for guidance and strength emanated from him. Then, as I watched, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew denser, and the Vatican itself seemed to waver, as if caught between two realities. Unnatural shadows crept along the walls, stretching toward the Pope like unseen hands. My breath caught. Something ominous pressed in on him. I turned to Jesus in alarm, yet he remained still, his gaze unwavering. "This battle is not fought with flesh and blood," he explained, "but among powers and principalities, among unseen forces, working both within and against my church." A deep clarity filled me. This was about something far greater than one man. I saw visions of secret conversations, powerful figures whispering decisions behind closed doors, influences tugging at the church's direction. Some hearts were genuine, earnestly striving to do God's will, while others were not. I witnessed division. Within the church, some stood steadfast in truth, clinging to Christ's teachings, while others began to compromise, not out of outright rebellion, but out of fear, pressure, and deception. Desperate for clarity, I turned once more to Jesus. What does this mean? What is unfolding at the highest level of the church? His face remained steady, yet I felt the weight of his sorrow. The church is my bride, he said, but many no longer see me within it. Some pursue power, others seek comfort, and still others strive to please the world instead of me. I shuddered as his words pierced me. I looked back at Pope Francis. He continued to pray, still seeking God amid the pressing forces. Deep within, I sensed that a monumental shift was coming. One that would impact not just him, but the entire church and the world. Jesus' presence beside me was like an anchor, steadying me against the onslaught of visions. "What should we do?" I asked, voice trembling. "How do we help you?" His eyes softened, though his voice stayed resolute. "Pray. Pray for my church. Pray for its leaders. Pray for those ensnared in deception, that they might embrace the truth before it's too late." I nodded, my spirit swelling with urgency and responsibility. I had always prayed for the church, but now I recognized its importance more than ever. Something was coming, and its future path was yet undecided. Then the vision shifted again, and suddenly I found myself no longer in the Vatican, but standing in a great hall of significance, its name eluding me. Bishops, cardinals, and priests, men devoted to serving God, surrounded me. Their robes marked their status, yet their faces revealed deeper truths. Some appeared troubled. Some furrowed their brows as they debated among themselves. Others were furious, gesticulating sharply with voices raised in frustration. And then there were those who sat in silence, their expressions unreadable while their eyes betrayed a disquieting hint of doubt. I couldn't quite discern the subject of their debate at first, but gradually the words became clearer. One voice insisted, "The church must evolve with the times. We must modernize, or we will lose the next generation." Another, calm yet resolute, countered, "We do not alter the truth to suit the world. The world must return to the truth." A third, tinged with frustration, added, "People are leaving. The church is losing its influence. We must do whatever it takes to remain relevant." I looked to Jesus, burdened by what I heard. "What is happening?" I asked. His expression remained steady, but his voice was heavy with sorrow. "The enemy aims to divide and weaken my people. He sows doubt among my shepherds, turning them against each other and distracting them from my call." I surveyed the men before me. Some genuinely sought to do right and truly believed they were protecting the church. Yet I also witnessed confusion, fear, and, most disheartening, compromise. I saw doctrines debated not through prayer and discernment, but with political maneuvering. Decisions were driven by popularity rather than truth. I observed leaders straining under external pressures, not from a lack of faith, but because the weight of worldly expectations was crushing them. They feared rejection by society. In that fear, some began to waver. Some abandoned core teachings, softening their stance to placate the masses. Others stayed silent when truth demanded to be spoken. And some went even further. I witnessed false teachings spreading like thick, deceptive smoke, creeping into churches and leading even the faithful astray. They sounded sanctimonious, they sounded loving, but underneath lay a distortion of the gospel, a claim that God desires happiness above all. They argued that all roads lead to the same truth, that sin is merely a matter of perspective. My heart raced at such claims. "But Lord, this is not what you taught," I protested. Jesus turned to me, his calm voice carrying undeniable authority. "My sheep recognize my voice." Those words struck deeply. Not everyone would be deceived. I saw some priests and bishops standing firm, unwilling to compromise or let the truth be twisted. Yet some were ridiculed, even attacked by fellow clergymen. Some were ousted from their positions. I witnessed entire congregations split, some embracing truth, others choosing the path of least resistance. Then, heartbreakingly, I saw people abandoning the church altogether. I watched as some walked out for the last time, shaking their heads in disillusionment. They had witnessed corruption, contradictions, and confusion, and rather than seek Jesus, they chose to walk away from everything. My heart ached. I saw good, faithful souls lost because they had turned to men instead of God. I turned to Jesus, my voice trembling. How do we stop this? How do we bring them back? His eyes, filled with sorrow and love, met mine. Prayer. Prayer is the weapon against deception. Prayer is the bridge that guides the lost back to me. My people must return, not just to rituals or tradition, but to me. I nodded as the weight of his words sank deep into my soul. I understood then. The church was not failing because God had forsaken it, but because many within had ceased seeking him first. The enemy's goal was not to destroy the church from the outside, but to fracture it from within, to immerse people in politics, popularity, and worldly approval until they forgot the church's true purpose, to bring souls to Jesus Christ. I knew what had to be done. We must return to prayer. We must embrace truth. We must stop placing our faith in men and restore it in God. And above all, we must not be deceived. I stood in silence as the vision shifted once more. Suddenly, I was no longer in that great hall of church debates, nor within any cathedral's walls. Instead, I found myself in the midst of a vast battlefield, unlike any I had ever imagined. The air was thick with tension, a dark mist blanketing the sky, swirling with an unnatural weight that pressed down like an invisible force. The battlefield stretched endlessly, not filled with armored soldiers, but with something far more profound. This was not a war fought with earthly weapons, but a battle of power, will, and truth against deception. Angels stood in luminous armor, their very presence radiating authority and purity. They shone with the light of heaven, cutting through the darkness like searing flames. Some wielded fiery swords, while others carried shields that glimmered with divine brilliancy. Then I saw their foes. The forces of darkness were twisted, their forms shifting like smoke, grotesque yet at times vaguely human. They murmured as they moved, their words seeping into the air like poison. I couldn't decipher their language, but I felt the intent behind it: fear, doubt, confusion. They were not just attacking with force, they were corrupting, spreading deception, poisoning minds, and influencing the world in unseen ways. And then, chillingly, I realized they were assaulting the church. I turned to see it. The church stood at the heart of the battlefield, not as a building, but as a spiritual presence spanning the earth, now under siege. The darkness pressed in from every side, a suffocating shroud around it. I watched entire congregations be swallowed, not by physical ruin, but by a creeping spiritual rot. Compromise, distorted teachings, fear, and division were infecting them like a slow, lethal poison. I longed to cry out, to dash forward and halt what was unfolding. Yet then, something caught my eye that stole my breath away, a spark of light. At first, it appeared as a small, wavering flame, barely resisting the encroaching gloom. But on closer look, I realized its nature. It was prayer. Amid the chaos of the battlefield, small clusters of people knelt together, hands clasped and voices raised, not out of terror, but out of steadfast faith. Their words blazed upward like fire, cutting through the darkness. The very moment their prayers ascended, something extraordinary occurred. The angels seemed to gather strength. Every genuine plea to God sent forth bursts of light. It wasn't about empty rituals or repeated phrases. These were heartfelt invocations spoken from souls desperate for truth and from believers earnestly searching for Jesus. With each prayer, the shadows pulled back. The demons shrieked as the pure light scorched them away. The deceptions they murmured crumbled before the power of truth. I witnessed churches, once feeble and barely holding on, suddenly ignite with divine fire, their glow spreading, their faith rekindled. In that instant, I understood the church was not beyond rescue. The enemy might not be able to obliterate it completely, but he was determined to erode it from within, to corrupt its essence and make believers forget the power they possessed. I turned to Jesus, my voice quivering, and asked, "What must we do?" His eyes, filled with both sorrow and hope, met mine. "The church will endure," he said, "but only if my people pray." His words reverberated deep within my soul. This struggle was not just for priests, bishops, or even the Pope. It was a battle for every believer. Though waged in unseen realms, its effects rippled through every church, every home, every heart on earth. I looked back at the tumult. The darkness still raged, still attempted to engulf everything. Yet now I saw hope. As long as believers prayed with genuine hearts, not merely in words, the darkness could never triumph. But we had to awaken. We could no longer be passive spectators. We had to fight back. Not with anger or disputes, but with prayer, truth, and unyielding faith. Standing there as the battle unfolded before me, I realized the outcome was far from decided. The church would remain, but whether it would stand strong or falter depended on us. Then the vision shifted, and I found myself standing on the brink of something immense, something that transcended time and space. Jesus stood beside me, his presence unwavering, his gaze brimming with sorrow and hope. I wasn't sure where I was, but I felt the gravity of what was about to be revealed. The air around us was heavy with an unseen force. A choice was laid out before us. Then Jesus lifted his hand, and instantly two paths unfolded. On the first, I saw a church reborn. It wasn't perfect, no human institution ever is, but it pulsed with life. I saw congregations filled not from duty, but with a genuine hunger for truth. People prayed with burning passion, their voices breaking through the darkness. I saw the young and the old alike reaching out for Jesus, not just adhering to old rituals, but truly encountering him. Within these churches, a brilliant light radiated warmth, extending beyond walls to touch lost hearts. Leaders humbled themselves, shifting their focus from status and power to Jesus alone. The distractions, divisions, and political games that had infiltrated the faith were cast aside. Revival surged, not in one place, but across the globe. Nations once grown cold turned back to God. I witnessed communities transformed, families reunited, lives changed not by coercion or fear, but by love and truth. Then the vision shifted, and my heart sank as I turned to the second path. This was the church that had grown weak, the one that had allowed deception to burrow deep. I saw empty pews, cathedrals that once thrived now gathering dust, and churches reduced to social halls, stripped of their power, holiness, and purpose. Leaders no longer preached truth, but offered what was convenient, what pleased the world. I saw people, once strong in faith, fall into confusion, abandoning their beliefs for comfortable ideologies. This weakened church existed, but it held no real strength. A church that had compromised too much. It was a church that had strived so hard for worldly acceptance that it forgot its true mission, and in its frailty, darkness had spread. Without a vibrant church, people wandered, lost and searching. I turned back to Jesus, the weight of this choice crashing down on me. "Which path will we take?" I asked, my voice trembling. He paused, looking deep into my soul, then said, "That is for my people to decide." His words struck me like a bolt of lightning. Nothing was set in stone. This was a choice. The church was not doomed, but it wasn't automatically saved either. What I saw was not prophecy, but possibility. Then Jesus spoke again, his tone filled with sacred urgency. "Place your trust not in men, but in me. My word is unchanging." In that instant, everything became clear. The church was never meant to rest on the strength of human leaders. It was founded on Christ alone. Hopes may wane, bishops may rise and fall, leaders can be either righteous or corrupt. But the church's foundation, Jesus himself, never falters. The true problem was that people had placed their faith in men rather than in God. Many had become lukewarm, clinging to tradition instead of truth, practicing religion without a real relationship. And that is why the church now stands at a crossroads. If my people, the body of Christ, do not awaken, if they continue to rely on human leaders rather than on Jesus himself, the church will weaken and the world will suffer. But if they return to Jesus, if they pray earnestly, if they seek truth and reject compromise and deception, then the church will be renewed. This is the mission Jesus has entrusted to me. I must wake people up. I must warn them that their faith cannot depend on leaders, positions, or titles. It must be rooted in Jesus and his word alone. I looked at the two paths one last time. The church renewed versus the church weakened. The choice was stark. But would the people choose wisely? In an instant, everything shifted, the weight of Jesus' words still etched deep within me. Before I could even speak, before I could beg to remain, I felt a gentle yet firm force tugging at me, drawing me away from the radiant presence of Christ. My heart ached at the thought of leaving, of returning to a world that now felt so remote. I turned to Jesus, desperation trembling in my voice. "Please let me stay." His eyes, deep and full of love beyond anything I had ever known, met mine. There was sorrow there, yet also clear purpose. "It is not your time yet," he said. Those words settled over me like an unalterable decree. I had no choice. Still, my soul longed to remain in this sanctuary of peace, truth, and overwhelming love. How could I go back? How could I return to a world where people were lost, where deception reigned and faith was fading? My voice shook as I pleaded, "I don't know if they will believe me. I don't know if I can do this." Jesus stepped closer, his presence filling every fiber of my being. He placed a hand on my shoulder, and in that touch, every doubt and fear melted away. "You are not responsible for who believes," he said. "You are only responsible for speaking the truth." I wanted desperately to cling to him, to defy the pull drawing me away, but it was too late. I felt myself being drawn away, falling rapidly and uncontrollably, as if being swept through space itself. The warmth of his presence faded, the brilliant light dimmed, and then came darkness. A stifling silence enveloped me, and then a sound. A deafening beeping filled my ears. A rush of air struck my lungs like fire. My body convulsed, as if jolted back to life. My chest burned, my limbs felt leaden, and a sharp pain surged through me, reminding me that I was human again. I was back. Blurred figures hovered over me, voices shouting with frantic urgency. "He's back! We have a pulse!" I gasped, choking as the weight of my body returned, slamming me back into the confines of flesh and bone. The harsh white lights overhead felt alien and sterile, nothing like the radiant glow I had just left. The cold air sent shivers down my spine. I could hear the rustling of equipment, the steady beeping of machines, and the hurried footsteps of doctors and nurses. Reality crashed down all at once. A doctor leaned over, eyes wide with disbelief. "We lost you," he murmured, as if he couldn't quite believe I was speaking. "Breathing. You're breathing," he said. I tried to respond, but my throat was raw, my body weak, and my limbs trembled as if no longer my own. I turned my head slightly, trying to focus, to process what had just happened. Had it all been real? Had I truly stood before Jesus? Had I witnessed the battle for the church, the creeping deception? Then, like a flood, it all rushed back. The vision of the church, the lies, the urgent warning in his voice, and most of all, his final words. "You must go back. You must tell them what you have seen." I attempted to sit up, but gentle hands pushed me back. "Rest, Father," a nurse said softly yet firmly. "You need time to recover." But I had no time. I had to speak. I forced the words out, barely a whisper. "I need to tell them." The doctor frowned. "Tell who?" I swallowed hard, my throat parched, but I managed to croak, "Everyone." In that moment, I knew I could never return to the life I once knew. I had seen the truth, and I was compelled to share it. When I was finally discharged from the hospital, everything felt different. The world outside, the same sky, the same streets, the same buildings appeared unchanged, but I was not the same. I couldn't be, for I had witnessed too much. For days I struggled to find words for what had happened. I even questioned myself. Was it real? Had I truly stood in Jesus' presence? Had I really seen the battle raging over the church, the deception infiltrating the hearts of believers? Or was it all just a fevered dream, a hallucination from my failing heart? No matter how hard I tried to rationalize, the truth was undeniable. It was real, more real than anything I had ever known. The weight of Jesus' words pressed into my soul with an urgency I could not ignore. I had been sent back for a reason. At first I didn't know how to begin. How do you share something so profound? How do you explain a vision so powerful and urgent when the world is too distracted, too wrapped up in its own chaos to listen? But then I remembered Jesus. You are not responsible for who believes. You are only responsible for speaking the truth. And so I began to speak. I told my fellow priests what had occurred. Some listened with wide eyes, nodding in reverence as their hands trembled with conviction. Others dismissed it with kind smiles and skeptical glances. One even remarked, "Near-death experiences can be powerful, but sometimes they're just the mind's way of coping with trauma." I sensed their doubt, but I knew better. I stepped beyond the walls of the church. I spoke to my congregation, to friends, to anyone who would listen. I recounted what I had seen, the creeping deception infiltrating the church, the false teachings, the way so many had lost sight of Christ in favor of empty rituals and tradition. I warned them that prayer was far more potent than they realized. I had witnessed with my own eyes how the faithful's prayers ignited light that repelled the darkness and halted destructive forces. I urged them that the church must return to Jesus, not merely a tradition or ceremony, but a true encounter with Him. Faith isn't about rules, status, or empty words. It's about knowing Christ, following His voice, and walking in His truth. I even spoke of Pope Francis, the heavy burden he bore, the struggles within the Vatican, the urgency of our time. Whether he was a righteous shepherd or swayed by worldly pressures was not for me to judge, but I knew one thing for sure. He and all our faith leaders needed our prayers. This was a critical moment for the church, a crossroads. I saw deception spreading like a shadow across the world, both outside and within the church. Some leaders guided their flocks with integrity, but others had been misled. The enemy seeks to divide my people. Jesus' warning echoed in my mind. I saw believers arguing over doctrine, leadership, and the future of faith, while the true battle raged unseen. And so I continued to speak. Some believed me immediately. I saw both fear and hope in their eyes. Hope that there was still time to turn back and reclaim what had been lost. Others mocked me, dismissing me as just another priest with wild claims, even suggesting it was all imagined. The church has been through worse, they scoffed. We don't need warnings from a priest who nearly died. I felt only sorrow, not anger, for they could not see what I had seen. This moment was different, exactly as Jesus had meant. Some would listen, some would not, but we must try. I now pray more fervently than ever and implore others to do the same. I call on every believer to remain rooted in truth, not in the words of men, but in God's word. I warn them, do not be deceived. This is not about fear. It is about choice. A future of renewal remains possible, but only if we return to God now. So I leave you with this message. Do not wait until it is too late. The time to return to God is now. Pray, seek truth, and stand firm in your faith. If this message resonates with you, share it. Spread the warning. Subscribe to Truth and stay vigilant. The days ahead will test our faith, but those who remain in Christ will not be shaken. May God bless you.